Hey there everyone, welcome back to the Dan Cave and welcome to part 3 of the 24th scale Fujimi GT40, the 66 Le Mans winning car. So part 3 is here. This is the final part. Part 1 got the bodywork prepped, primed, painted, deckled, clear coated. Part 2 got some of the interior and chassis done. Part 3 is now going to get all those final bits together, get the bodywork finished, so flattered and polished and that kind of stuff, and final assembly. So once again, it's a fairly short video because it is a fairly simple kit, but it's a fairly short video, hopefully to the point, and covers everything adequately. So yeah, let's dive on over to the bench and see how part 3 goes, and we'll get this one to the conclusion. So I'll be back at the end for some final thoughts. See you in a few minutes. So it's straight into the action today, and the action starts with some brush painting. So brake discs are completely invisible behind the wheels, so they just get brush painted in a suitable metallic shade. I think you use silver from Revell. The gearbox casing and back of the engine gets painted in a mixture of steel and aluminium, just to give a little bit of contrast, although most of this area of the car is almost completely invisible. So there is the fuel tanks at the back, so they're going to be masked up and sprayed because they are a little bit more visible than some of the other parts. So I just thought a nice smooth airbrushed finish on those will look a little bit better. So a little bit of intricate masking just to cover up the framework, and they'll go over to the spray booth for spraying. So wheels for this car are going to be painted in a gold color. So the kit chrome is going to be removed using some household bleach. These have literally sat in bleach for less than 5 minutes and the chrome has just fallen off them. So once they're washed and dried, it's a case of getting them over to the spray booth using some UMP black primer. So it's a case of just building up a couple of light coats just to lay down some coverage. This plastic underneath the chrome is a little bit shiny, so just a nice couple of light coats will just start to build it up, get a nice layer that subsequent primer layers will adhere better to. Once I'm happy with that kind of first coat, give it 10 minutes to dry, then you can go back in for a second and then finally a third coat. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to use some Alclad Pale Gold. And that's going to be built up in some very, very light coats until I get the kind of pale gold, but actually it looks a little bit of a dark gold color the way it's come out. But I think that's spot on for how I wanted the wheels to look for this car. So again, it's some very light coats just to build up that color, build up the coverage, and get the kind of level of goldness that I want from these wheels. So as you can see, I couldn't give a number on the number of coats because again, I'm just doing some very, very light passes just to get the level of color that I want. But all in all, I think the way the colors come out is spot on for how I wanted it to look for this kit. So there's a few other bits like the knockoffs, fuel cap and the exhaust stacks. So they were all primed in UMP gloss black and are now getting some coats of Alclad chrome, which actually does spray very, very nicely. So all those painted parts have been left to dry for 24 hours, after which it's time to start some of the final assembly. So for the front discs, there's 2 poly caps. So they just get slotted on to the little pins that were provided in the kit. Front shock absorber needs to get fitted first. So that just kind of fits between the upper and lower wishbone. And then the front kind of brake assembly and hub assembly can just be popped into place So they're not glued in place because they will remain movable or posable. And a steering arm will sit between both front hub assemblies, which will give you that articulation and posability. Just a case of getting them lined up. Kind of like to use the tweezers just to pop them in place, and they pop on very, very nicely. So there's a few more pieces belong to the interior. So this kind of side combing, which is part of the inner door. So that gets popped on with some CA glue. So they, of course, were primed in UMP black a little bit earlier in the build process. They've just been left in UMP black, and they're popped in place on either side of the seats, like so. So the rear kind of engine gearbox bulkhead assembly was all made up separately. That sits on a couple of locating points. A little bit of a squeeze to get them in place, just to make sure they line up properly and to make sure that that kind of wheel height is correct on both sides. Once I'm happy that they're in place, the fuel tanks can then be added as well. And again, they just pop in place using some CA glue. And then there's a parcel shelf, I suppose you should call it. So that sits over where the engine would be. Of course, in this kit, there is no engine, pretty much curbside kit. Again, that pops in place with a little bit of CA glue. And as you can see, that gaping void is where the engine would be. So once I'm happy with all that, it's time for a little bit of a flat and polish on the bodywork. So using some micro mesh with some water, just to remove any high spots, any dust spots, progress my way up all the way up to 12,000 grit. Make sure you avoid any edges. You don't want to burn through. Once you're happy with that, you can move on to the UMP polishing system. So starting with the UMP number 1, which is the compound, working my way all the way around the bodywork, applying some of the polish, working it in to the finish, and then removing any excess. Once I'm happy with that and I've removed any of the remnants in any of the panel lines, you can move on to stage 2, which is the polish, and it's pretty much the same process. Work my way all the way around the kit, and then ultimately removing any excess, and then using the toothbrush as shown on screen with some water to remove any of the remnants of the polish from any of the panel lines. So with that completed, it's time to start adding some of the parts which need to go in the interior before we attach the body to the chassis. So the windscreen is fitted from the inside. The remaining glass fits from the outside. So it's just a windscreen at this stage. There is 2 locating pins provided. A little dab of CA glue on each one should be sufficient to hold it. And then there is a couple of light fixtures which also get fitted from the rear of the front bumper, the lance front section. So this is the big section. This is the big task. So from what I've heard, it's an incredibly difficult fit to get this body and this chassis to fit together. So I was expecting a huge amount of drama, huge amount of problems at this stage. So to start with, I'm just getting a little bit of a squeeze on the sides of the body just to try and get it over the high point of the chassis. Slowly working my way, trying not to put too much pressure. So as you can see, that first side has just gone over the high point. Just checking for clearances. And now I'm going to do the same on the opposite side as well. A little bit of a push forward just to get the interior aligned. And then it's to try and get these fuel tanks in under the rear of the bodywork. and pop. Seems to have gone in. Now, somewhat to my astonishment and amazement, I'm sat here thinking, what have I done wrong? This appears to have all gone way too easily. As I'm looking around, checking everything is aligned, checking the edges of the chassis meet the bodywork, check that the interior is snug, and yeah, it seems to have popped in absolutely no problem whatsoever. I've definitely had worse kits than this to fit. Maybe I just got lucky this time. So with that step out of the way, it's time to get on and start work on the wheels. So they're painted, they've been sat to cure for at least 24 hours. That paint will be completely cured at this stage. So just remove each of the wheels from the sprue. And then, as you can imagine, there's a tyre for each. Now, the front tyres and rear tyres are a different width. It's quite obvious. The rear tyres are much wider. So they just pop on the rims like so. And then, of course, there is some tyre markings. So this car was quite unique during the race. It actually started on Firestone tyres and then moved to Goodyear later in the race. So as this car is shiny, it's going to get the Firestone ones because this is how the car would have looked at the start of the race. So they're kind of typical reverse decals. So you just want to make sure you peel off the decal off the backing paper. So you're just left with this slightly translucent wax paper. And these go down the reverse way. So you apply the paper with the decal on the back of it onto the tyre. And I just like to use a cotton bud dipped in some water just to press down and wet the area. And obviously being very careful not to move any of the decal film at this stage because that water will soak right through. So a little bit of a rolling action just to spread out any of that moisture. Make sure it gets to all the parts of the decal. And then slowly peel it away. And you should be left with a perfect Firestone marking on those tyres, which I seem to have. So then repeat that step for all 4 tyres. And that's that job done. So each of the knockoffs can also be added using a little bit of PVA glue. So I'm using glue and glaze, which is my PVA of choice at the moment. So that's 4 wheels and tyres done. So there's plenty of glass work to do on the outside of the vehicle. So again, a little bit of PVA glue and using a cocktail stick with some blue tack on the end of it just to carefully pick up the inserts, drop them in place. And if you've let the PVA glue get a little glue and glaze, get a little bit sticky, it gets very, very tacky and has an instant grab on it. And then repeat that for all of the glass work on the light lenses on the front and rear. And then pretty much exactly the same for the external windows as well. So in this case, the rear window, a couple of dots of PVA glue. And that just drops into place absolutely perfectly. And then I can do exactly the same with the side windows as well. So it's nicely recessed, so a couple of small drops of PVA glue, and that should be enough to hold them in place. The fit on these was pretty much spot on, so they just dropped in very, very nicely. There is a little bit of PE to go on the rear of the car. So it's been snipped off the PE runner using some Zuron PE shears. And I've just cleaned up the edges with a diamond file. And that smooths off any of the little nubs from the sprue. And once again, some glue and glaze is used just to pop that in place. So a little bit of pressure just to get it to bite. and that'll stay in place. And then I can pop on all of the 4 wheels onto the poly caps that were fitted earlier. All of those wheels fit in place. And then it's a final bit of a cleanup using the UMP shine, gets rid of any fingerprints and just adds a lovely level of shine to the paint finish. And this is the finished product. So I have to say, really, really pleased with how this kit has come out. Really pleased with the kit itself and how it went together. And overall, very, very happy with the finish. So let's head on back to me for some final thoughts about how this build has gone. And there we have it. The 66 Le Mans winning Ford GT40 in 24 scale by Fujimi is done and dusted. And yeah, what a cracker it is. Really enjoyed this kit. Relatively simple, but very enjoyable nonetheless. And what an iconic car to build, and somewhat iconic scheme as well. So yeah, so there we have it. So plus points of the build. I think it went a lot easier. Certainly the body getting onto that chassis was a lot easier than stories from other people have told me. I know some people have had issues in that area. I don't know what I've done different, whether it's just a tolerance thing, and I've ended up with one that just fits a little bit better. Wasn't as much of a problem as I expected. That was definitely a plus point. I think the overall shape is spot on. The stance looks spot on to me. Downsides, Fujimi decals are awful. Missing the white fern as well for the Kiwi drivers. They can be got as aftermarket, but for me this was a quick box build, and you know, my contribution to the ISM Le Mans group build for this year. So yeah, so overall really pleased with the outcome. Would I build another one? Yeah, definitely. Be nice to build another one. I know Fujimi do the later Ford GT as well, which is the one Revell have reboxed, and Meng. Is it Meng? I think Meng do one as well, which I know has its issues as well. But otherwise, very happy. Pleased with how the build has gone. So yeah, reasonably top marks for me for that kit. So there we go. Thank you very much for watching. If you're not a subscriber, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like the video, and feel free to leave a comment. They're always very welcome. So that's the end of this video build series. So yeah, so stay tuned for the next build series, which will hopefully be coming up reasonably soon. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for sticking with me, and I'll see you all very soon. So bye for now, and thank you once again. Bye.